The desert wind carried whispers of a curse with it, swirling dust around Abigail Keller's feet as she stood at the edge of Copper Canyon, her reputation preceding her like a shadow at sunset. Folk in these parts crossed the street when they saw her coming. Mothers pulled their children close, and men tipped their hats before hurrying away. She'd grown accustomed to the solitude that followed her like a loyal dog, but that didn't make the sting of isolation any less painful on days when the loneliness pressed down on her chest like a stone. It was 1876, and the Arizona Territory was unforgiving to most, but especially to a woman traveling alone, more so when that woman was believed to bring misfortune to anyone who dared show her kindness. Abigail adjusted her worn leather satchel across her shoulder. Dark auburn hair escaping from beneath her modest bonnet as she made her way toward the small mining town of Redemption. She had nowhere else to go. After her aunt's passing 2 months prior, the tiny homestead they'd shared had been claimed by the bank. With nothing but a few personal possessions and the clothes on her back, Abigail had walked the 20 miles to the nearest town, hoping to find work and perhaps, though she scarcely admitted it to herself, a fresh start where her name wasn't synonymous with calamity. The main street of Redemption appeared before her as she crested the hill, a dusty thoroughfare lined with false-fronted buildings, horses tied to hitching posts, and men in various states of industry and idleness. A stagecoach rumbled past, kicking up dust that made her cough and squint. She pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders, steeling herself for the inevitable whispers that would follow. The town's residents didn't disappoint. As she made her way down the street, conversations hushed and eyes tracked her progress with suspicion and dread. "That's her, the Keller girl," an elderly man muttered to his companion, "the cursed one." "Better steer clear," the other replied, not bothering to lower his voice. "Everything she touches turns to ash." Abigail kept her gaze fixed ahead, her face a careful mask that betrayed none of the hurt their words inflicted. She'd learned long ago that showing vulnerability only invited more cruelty. The rumors had started after her parents died of fever when she was just 16. Then came the drought that withered crops the year she worked at the Henderson farm, the mine collapse that killed 12 men the month after she sewed new curtains for the foreman's office, and most recently, the fire that had consumed half of Willowbrook after she'd stayed there for just one night. Coincidences, all of them, but people needed someone to blame for their misfortunes. The Silver Buckle Saloon stood at the far end of the street, its weathered sign creaking in the afternoon breeze. Abigail hesitated before climbing the steps. She needed work, and saloons were often the only establishments willing to hire women without references, especially women with reputations like hers. The interior was dim after the bright sunlight outside, smelling of whiskey, tobacco, and unwashed bodies. A few early patrons glanced up as she entered, their expressions shifting from curiosity to recognition, and finally to alarm. The bartender, a heavy-set man with a walrus mustache, paused in his glass polishing. "I'm looking for work," Abigail said directly, approaching the bar before her courage could desert her. "I can clean, serve drinks, cook if needed." The bartender's eyes narrowed. "You're that Keller woman, ain't you? From over Willowbrook way?" Abigail nodded once, her chin lifting slightly. "I am." "They say you're cursed," he stated flatly. "Say misfortune follows you like a shadow." "People say many things," she replied evenly. "I need work, and I'm not afraid of hard labor." The bartender seemed to weigh his options, glancing around at the patrons who were watching the exchange with undisguised interest. Finally, He shook his head. Can't risk it, miss. Business is hard enough without tempting fate. A hollow feeling spread through Abigail's chest, but she only nodded. It was the response she'd expected. She turned to leave when a deep voice spoke from a shadowy corner. If you're turning her away on account of superstitious nonsense, Barton, I might have to reconsider where I take my business. All heads turned toward the speaker, a tall man who unfolded himself from his chair and stepped into the light. He wore the dust of the trail on his clothes, a revolver on his hip, and a confidence in his posture that marked him as someone accustomed to being heard. His face was weathered by sun and wind, stubble darkening a strong jawline, and his eyes, a striking blue, were fixed not on Abigail, but on the bartender. Now, Wade, you know I respect your opinion, the bartender said carefully. But you ain't heard what they say about this woman. Bad luck follows her like a shadow. I heard you the first time, the man Wade interrupted. He turned to Abigail then, studying her with an intensity that should have made her uncomfortable, but somehow didn't. What's your name, miss? Abigail Keller, she answered, straightening her spine. Wade Eastwood, he replied with a slight tip of his hat. And what exactly is this curse you're supposed to be carrying? The directness of his question caught her off guard. Most people whispered about her, not to her. Misfortune befalls those who help me or come near me, she said, the words bitter on her tongue. Or so they say. Wade's mouth quirked into something that wasn't quite a smile. Well, they say I'm cursed too. Guess we'll match. A startled murmur ran through the saloon. The bartender cleared his throat uncomfortably. Wade, you shouldn't joke about such things. Who says I'm joking? Wade replied, his eyes never leaving Abigail's. Miss Keller needs work, and as it happens, I need someone to cook and keep house at my ranch. The last fella quit last week, and I'm about tired of my own cooking. Abigail's heart beat faster. You'd hire me, despite what people say? Maybe because of what they say, Wade answered cryptically. I make my own judgments about people. Way I see it, if you're cursed and I'm cursed, maybe the bad luck cancels out. He gestured toward the door. My wagon's outside. If you want the position, it's yours. Abigail hesitated, glancing around at the hostile faces in the saloon. She had no reason to trust this stranger, but she had even less reason to stay where she clearly wasn't wanted. What kind of curse are you supposed to have, Mr. Eastwood? She asked. Something dark flickered in his eyes. The kind that follows a man who's done things he can't undo. The kind that keeps him looking over his shoulder. He paused. The kind that makes him understand what it's like to be judged before you've had a chance to speak your piece. Their gazes held for a long moment. Around them, the saloon had gone quiet, the other patrons watching this exchange with a mixture of dread and fascination. I accept your offer, Abigail said finally. The ride to Wade Eastwood's ranch was silent for the first hour, the wagon jostling over the uneven terrain as they left redemption behind. Abigail sat stiffly on the seat beside him, her small collection of belongings secured in the back. She studied him from the corner of her eye, the set of his shoulders, the way his hands held the reins with casual competence, the profile that could have been carved from the same stone as the mesas rising in the distance. You can ask, he said suddenly, not turning to look at her. I know you're wondering, Abigail startled. About your curse? Wade nodded, a strand of dark hair falling across his forehead as he did. Seems only fair. You told me yours. I didn't tell you anything, she corrected. I only repeated what others say. That earned her a quick, assessing glance. Smart distinction. So what do you think? Are you cursed, Miss Keller? The question hung between them, more intimate than she'd expected. Abigail looked out at the landscape, the red rock formations, the sparse vegetation clinging stubbornly to life, the vast emptiness that somehow felt less threatening than a crowded street. I think people need explanations for the terrible things that happen, she said finally, and I happen to be nearby for several terrible things. Wade nodded slowly. And it's easier to blame the unfamiliar than to accept that bad things sometimes just happen. You didn't answer my question either, Abigail pointed out, about your supposed curse. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. No, I didn't. He was quiet for a moment. I was a Union soldier, saw things, did things during the war that follow a man. After, I rode with a man named Sherman for a while, worked as a bounty hunter, made more enemies than friends. And that's your curse? Enemies? That's part of it. Wade adjusted his grip on the reins. The other part is that I seem to attract trouble wherever I go. Last 3 towns I settled in had problems shortly after bank robberies, range wars, the like. Folks started noticing the pattern. Were you involved? Abigail asked boldly. No, he answered, meeting her gaze directly. But being in the vicinity was enough to raise suspicions. Same as you, I expect. The parallel wasn't lost on Abigail. She considered his words as they traveled farther into the wilderness, the town receding into the distance behind them. So you hire the cursed woman because you're cursed yourself, she mused aloud. That's either very brave or very foolish, Mr. Eastwood. Wade's laugh was unexpected, a rich, deep sound that seemed to surprise even him. Could be both. Or maybe I just know what it's like to be judged by rumors instead of actions. As they crested a hill, Wade gestured ahead. There it is, Eastwood Ranch. Abigail leaned forward, taking in the property spread before them. It wasn't the largest ranch she'd ever seen, but it was well maintained, a 2-story main house of sturdy timber construction, a large barn, corrals, and several outbuildings. A stream cut through the property, lined with cottonwood trees whose leaves shimmered silver green in the late afternoon light. It's lovely, she said truthfully. It's home, Wade replied, a note of pride in his voice. Built it myself after the war. 10 years of work right there. As they approached, Abigail noticed a wizened older man emerging from the barn, waving a greeting. Wade returned the wave. That's Hector Garcia, he explained. Works the horses, helps with the cattle. His daughter Maria comes by twice a week to help with laundry. But otherwise, it's just been me since my cook quit. Why did he leave? Abigail asked, suddenly suspicious. Wade glanced at her, seeming to understand her concern. Got a letter from his sister in Kansas City. She's ailing and needed family. He paused. Had nothing to do with any curse, if that's what you're wondering. They pulled up to the house, and Wade set the brake before hopping down. He came around to offer Abigail his hand, which she accepted after only a moment's hesitation. His palm was warm and calloused against hers, the grip firm but gentle as he helped her down from the wagon. "Hector," Wade called as the older man approached. "This is Miss Abigail Keller. She'll be taking over the cooking and housekeeping." Hector nodded politely, though Abigail didn't miss the quick, assessing glance he gave her. "Welcome, señorita. The kitchen has been missing a woman's touch." "Mr. Garcia," she acknowledged with a small smile. "I'll show you round," Wade said, grabbing her bag from the wagon. "You can get settled in, and we can discuss your duties over supper, which I'm afraid will be my poor cooking one last time." The interior of the ranch house was surprisingly well appointed, considering it was primarily occupied by a single man. The furniture was sturdy but tasteful, the floors swept clean, though Abigail noticed a fine layer of dust on some of the surfaces. Large windows let in ample light, and a stone fireplace dominated the main living area. "This is impressive craftsmanship," Abigail commented, running her hand along a bookshelf built into the wall. "Did you make this as well?" Wade nodded. "Winter work. Not much ranching to be done when snow's on the ground, so I keep my hands busy other ways." He led her toward a staircase. "Your room is upstairs, first door on the right. Mine's at the end of the hall, and there are 2 spare rooms between. The kitchen's through there," he added, pointing to a doorway off the main room. "Pantry's stocked reasonably well, but we can ride into town for anything you need." "Town?" Abigail repeated, unable to keep the apprehension from her voice. "You mean redemption?" Wade studied her face. "It's the closest, yes. But we could try Silver Creek if you prefer. It's half a day's ride, but they have a better general store." The consideration in his offer touched her. "Thank you, Mr. Eastwood." "Wade," he corrected. "If we're going to be living under the same roof, Mr. Eastwood seems overly formal." Abigail nodded, though the familiarity made her slightly uncomfortable. "Then you should call me Abigail." "Abigail," he repeated, as if testing the name. He cleared his throat. "I'll let you get settled. Supper in an hour?" Left alone in the room that was now hers, Abigail set down her bag and surveyed her new accommodation. It was simple but comfortable, a narrow bed with a quilt that appeared handmade, a small dresser, a washstand with a pitcher and bowl, and a window that looked out over the ranch property. Someone had placed a small vase with wildflowers on the dresser, a welcoming touch that brought unexpected tears to her eyes. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to hope. Perhaps here, with this strange man who claimed to be as cursed as she was, she might find some measure of peace. The first weeks at Eastwood Ranch passed in a blur of activity as Abigail settled into her role. She rose before dawn each day to start the fire in the kitchen stove, prepare breakfast for Wade and Hector, and plan the day's meals. The kitchen became her domain, a place where she could express creativity through her cooking, a skill her aunt had taught her, and one of the few pleasures she'd been able to maintain throughout her difficult years. Wade was often out working with the cattle or horses from sunrise to sunset, but he always returned for meals, unfailingly complimenting her cooking and engaging her in conversation. She learned that he was 32, had grown up in Pennsylvania before the war, and had come west afterward, seeking something he couldn't quite name. "A fresh start, maybe," he admitted one evening as they sat on the porch after supper, watching the sunset paint the cliffs in shades of orange and crimson. Or perhaps just open space where a man could breathe without feeling the weight of the past. Abigail understood that sentiment all too well. "And did you find it? That freedom from the past?" Wade considered her question, taking a sip from his coffee cup. "Some days I think so. Then something happens to remind me that a man carries his history with him, no matter how far he travels." They fell into a comfortable routine, Wade respecting her privacy while gradually sharing more of himself. He seemed genuinely interested in her thoughts and opinions, asking about the books she chose from his surprisingly extensive library, listening attentively when she spoke. It was disarming, this careful attention from a man who didn't look at her with fear or suspicion. Abigail found herself lowering her guard incrementally, allowing small smiles to escape, occasionally sharing anecdotes from her life before the rumors started. One morning, about a month after her arrival, Abigail was hanging laundry on the line behind the house when she noticed a group of riders approaching from the east. She counted 5 men, all armed, moving with purpose toward the ranch house. Wade emerged from the barn, Hector close behind. Both men had noticed the visitors as well. Wade motioned for Abigail to go inside, his expression suddenly guarded. "Stay in the house," he called to her. "It's probably nothing, but just in case." Abigail retreated to the kitchen, but positioned herself near the window where she could observe what happened. The men reined in their horses in the yard, dust billowing around their mounts. The leader, a thick-set man with a sun-weathered face partially hidden beneath a wide-brimmed hat, dismounted first. "Eastwood," he called, his voice carrying clearly through the open window. "Been a while." "Sheriff Dawson," Wade acknowledged, his posture relaxed but alert. "What brings you all the way out here?" "Got word you took in the Keller woman," Dawson said, glancing toward the house. "The one they say brings death wherever she goes." Abigail's stomach clenched. She should have known her presence wouldn't go unremarked for long. "I hired a housekeeper," Wade corrected mildly. "Miss Keller has been doing excellent work these past weeks. No death or destruction to report." The sheriff shifted his weight. "Some folks in town are concerned, after what happened in Willowbrook." "I wasn't aware the law concerned itself with gossip and superstition," Wade interrupted, his voice still casual, but with a steely undertone that made Abigail shiver. "Has Miss Keller been charged with a crime?" "No, but then I'm not sure what official business brings you to my property, Sheriff." The two men stared at each other for a long moment. Finally, the sheriff broke the silence. "There's also the matter of Jeb Harlow." Wade went very still. "What about him?" "Word is he's been seen in these parts." "Thought you should know, considering your history." Abigail couldn't see Wade's face, but she noticed how his shoulders tensed at the name. "I appreciate the warning," Wade said finally. "If that's all?" The sheriff hesitated, then nodded. "For now. But Eastwood, if trouble follows that woman to our county, folks will hold you responsible too." "Noted," Wade replied tersely. "Safe ride back to town." The men remounted and rode away, kicking up dust in their wake. Wade stood watching them go, his posture rigid until they disappeared from view. Only then did he turn toward the house, his expression troubled as he caught sight of Abigail in the window. She met him at the door, unable to pretend she hadn't overheard. "I'm causing problems for you." Wade shook his head. "Dawson's always been more politician than lawman." "He's just making noise to appease some of the more superstitious townspeople." "Who is Jeb Harlow?" Abigail asked directly. Wade's expression darkened. "Part of my past that I'd hoped would stay buried." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Let's sit down. There are things you should know, especially now." They settled at the kitchen table, where Abigail poured coffee for them both. Wade wrapped his hands around the mug, staring into its depths, as if gathering his thoughts. "I told you I worked as a bounty hunter after the war," he began. "What I didn't mention was that I had a partner, Jeb Harlow. We rode together for 3 years, brought in some of the worst outlaws in the territory." He paused. Then something changed in Jeb. He started enjoying the killing too much. Started suggesting we could make more money working the other side of the law. Abigail listened intently, watching the play of emotions across Wade's face. "I refused," he continued. "Told him I was done. That's when I bought this land, started building something honest. Jeb didn't take it well, said I'd betrayed him. Wade's knuckles whitened around the mug. 6 months later, he came back with a gang. They burned my first house to the ground, killed 2 of my ranch hands. I was in town that day delivering cattle. By the time I got back, "You rebuilt," Abigail said softly. Wade nodded. "And I hunted Jeb down, tracked him for months, finally found him in New Mexico. There was a confrontation, I shot him, thought I'd killed him. Apparently I was wrong." "And that's your curse?" Abigail asked. "This man who won't stay dead?" A sad smile touched Wade's lips. "That's part of it. The other part is that everywhere I try to make a home, trouble seems to find me. People I care about get hurt." He met her gaze directly. "Now you understand why I wasn't bothered by your supposed curse. We're not so different, you and I." Abigail considered his words, feeling a connection to this man that went beyond employer and employee. "What will you do if he really is back?" "Finish what I started," Wade answered grimly. "But in the meantime, you should know there might be danger. If you want to leave, I'll understand. I can arrange safe passage to another town, give you enough money to—" "No," Abigail interrupted firmly. "I'm not running, not anymore." Surprise flickered across Wade's face. "Abigail, Jeb is dangerous. If he learns He stopped abruptly. "That you've what?" she pressed. Wade looked away. "That I've found some measure of peace here. He'd try to destroy that just on principle." The words hung between them, laden with implications neither was ready to address. Finally, Abigail reached across the table and placed her hand over his the first time she'd initiated physical contact between them. "Then we'll face whatever comes together," she said quietly. "2 cursed souls might stand a better chance than one alone." Wade's gaze dropped to their hands, then lifted to her face. Something shifted in his eyes, a warmth that made Abigail's heart beat faster. "Together," he agreed softly. As summer gave way to autumn, life at Eastwood Ranch settled into a comfortable rhythm punctuated by moments of growing closeness between Abigail and Wade. They began taking evening rides together, Wade showing her the boundaries of his property, teaching her about the land and the cattle. Abigail found herself looking forward to these excursions, to the quiet conversations and companionable silences as they watched the sunset paint the horizon. Despite the sheriff's warning, there had been no sign of Jeb Harlow, and gradually the tension that had gripped Wade began to ease. He laughed more freely, shared stories from his youth, and found excuses to be around the house when Abigail was working. For her part, Abigail discovered a newfound confidence. The constant fear that had been her companion for years began to recede, replaced by a cautious optimism. She expanded her responsibilities around the ranch, learning to ride better, helping with the garden, even assisting Hector with some of the gentler horses. One crisp October afternoon, Wade found her in the garden, harvesting the last of the season's vegetables before the first frost. "I need to ride into Silver Creek tomorrow," he said, leaning against the fence. "Thought you might like to come along. We could use some supplies, and there's a harvest festival happening." Abigail looked up, wiping dirt from her hands. "A festival? With other people?" Wade's expression softened with understanding. "Different town, different people. And you'll be with me." He paused. "It's been 3 months, Abigail. Nothing bad has happened. Maybe it's time to test the waters." The idea both frightened and tempted her. She hadn't been to town since arriving at the ranch, having sent lists with Wade or Hector when supplies were needed. The thought of facing strangers, of seeing the familiar fear and suspicion in their eyes, made her stomach clench. But Wade was right. Nothing calamitous had occurred during her time at the ranch. No fires, no deaths, no unexplained accidents. Perhaps the curse, if it had ever existed at all, had finally lifted. "All right," she agreed hesitantly. "I'll go." Wade's smile was worth the anxiety the decision provoked. "We'll leave at first light. It's about 4 hours' ride." The journey to Silver Creek the next morning was pleasant, the air crisp with autumn's bite, but the sun warm on their faces. They rode side by side, Wade occasionally pointing out landmarks or sharing stories about the land they passed through. Abigail found herself relaxing in his company, almost forgetting her apprehension about being among strangers again. Silver Creek proved to be larger than Redemption, a bustling town that had grown prosperous from both mining and as a stop on the stage line. The main street was decorated with corn husks and colorful bunting for the festival, and people moved about with the cheerful energy of celebration. As they rode down the street, Abigail tensed, expecting the usual hush that fell when she was recognized. Instead, people nodded politely or called greetings to Wade, regarding her with nothing more than mild curiosity. "They don't know me here," she realized aloud, relief washing over her. Wade tied their horses at a hitching post outside the general store. "No, they don't. Today, you're just a woman visiting town with—" He hesitated, then finished. "A friend." The word seemed inadequate somehow, but Abigail nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Wade helped her down from her horse, his hands lingering at her waist slightly longer than necessary. The warmth of his touch stayed with her as they entered the store. The shopkeeper greeted Wade by name, and they spent an hour selecting supplies, flour, sugar, coffee, fabric for new curtains Abigail had mentioned wanting to make, and various other necessities. Wade insisted on adding a few items that were clearly meant as gifts for her: a pretty comb for her hair, a book of poetry she had admired, a small bottle of lavender perfume. "You don't need to do this," she protested quietly as he added the items to their purchases. "I want to," he replied simply. "You've brought something to the ranch that was missing before. Consider it a thank you." His words warmed her more than the gifts themselves. When they stepped back onto the street, their supplies arranged to be delivered to the ranch by freight wagon the following week. The festival was in full swing. A band played lively music in the town square. Children ran laughing between stalls selling food and handcrafts, and couples danced in a cleared area before the bandstand. "Hungry?" Wade asked, nodding toward a stall selling fried apple fritters. "Starving," Abigail admitted with a smile. They wandered through the festival, sampling food, examining crafts, and watching the dancing. For the first time in years, Abigail felt normal, just a woman enjoying a beautiful day with a man whose company she treasured. When Wade purchased a small carved wooden horse from an elderly craftsman and presented it to her, she impulsively rose on tiptoe and kissed his cheek in thanks. The moment she did it, she froze, mortified by her boldness. Wade looked equally startled, but then his expression softened into something that made her heart race. "What was that for?" he asked, his voice low. "For giving me this day," she answered honestly, "for making me feel like myself again." Wade's gaze held hers, intense and searching. "Abigail, Whatever he had been about to say was interrupted by the band starting a new, livelier tune. Around them, people moved toward the dancing area. "Would you like to dance?" Wade asked instead, offering his hand. Abigail hesitated. "I'm not very practiced. It's been years since. Neither am I, he assured her. We can be unpracticed together. She placed her hand in his, allowing him to lead her to the edge of the dancing area. His arm slipped around her waist, holding her with gentle confidence as they joined the other dancers. Abigail was acutely aware of his proximity, the solid strength of him as they moved to the music, the way his eyes never left her face. They were midway through their second dance when Abigail noticed a ripple of disturbance at the edge of the square. A small group of men had entered from a side street, moving with the distinctive swagger of those who had been drinking heavily. Their leader, a tall man with a shock of red hair beneath his hat, was scanning the crowd with narrowed eyes. Wade noticed her distraction. "What is it?" "Those men," she murmured, nodding slightly in their direction. "Something about them seems wrong." Wade turned, his body tensing as he caught sight of the group. "Trouble," he agreed tersely. "We should go." They began making their way toward the edge of the square, but before they could reach their horses, a shout went up from the red-haired man. "Eastwood! Wade Eastwood!" Wade stopped, his hand moving instinctively toward his gun. "Keep walking," he said quietly to Abigail. "Get to the horses." "I'm not leaving you," she replied firmly. The red-haired man pushed through the crowd, his companions close behind. People scattered, sensing the potential for violence. The music faltered and died. "Well, if it ain't the righteous bounty hunter himself," the man called, coming to a stop a few yards away. "Jeb said we might find you in these parts." At the mention of Jeb Harlow, Wade's expression hardened. "I don't know you, friend." "Name's Cutter, and I ain't your friend." The man spat on the ground. "Jeb Harlow sends his regards, says he's coming for what's his." "Nothing here belongs to Jeb," Wade replied evenly, though Abigail could feel the tension radiating from him. Cutter's gaze shifted to Abigail, a leering smile spreading across his face. "Maybe not yet, but Jeb always did like pretty things." He took a step closer. "This your woman, Eastwood. Jeb will be mighty interested to know that." Wade moved so quickly that Abigail barely registered what happened. One moment Cutter was leering at her, the next he was on his knees, Wade's revolver pressed against his temple. "You tell Jeb that if he comes anywhere near this woman, I'll finish what I started in New Mexico," Wade said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Now get on your horses and ride out of town before I decide to save Jeb the trouble of killing you himself." The other men had drawn their weapons, but the cold precision of Wade's movements gave them pause. A tense silence hung over the square. "This ain't over, Eastwood," Cutter managed through clenched teeth. "It is for today," Wade replied, stepping back but keeping his gun trained on the man. "Ride out, now." The festival crowd watched in stunned silence as Cutter staggered to his feet and, with a final venomous glare, motioned for his men to retreat. They backed away slowly, mounting their horses and riding out of town at a deliberate pace that was more threat than compliance. Only when they had disappeared from view did Wade holster his weapon. He turned to find Abigail watching him, her face pale but composed. "We need to go," he said grimly. "They'll be back with reinforcements." The ride back to the ranch was urgent and largely silent, both of them processing what had happened. They pushed the horses harder than usual, Wade constantly scanning the horizon for signs of pursuit. Abigail's mind raced with questions, but she held them until they reached the safety of the ranch. As they approached, Wade gave a specific whistle that brought Hector running from the barn. A few terse sentences in Spanish conveyed the situation, and the older man nodded grimly, moving to take their horses. "Inside," Wade directed, his hand at the small of Abigail's back, guiding her toward the house. Once the door was closed behind them, he checked every window, drawing curtains and checking the locks on doors. "Who was that man?" Abigail finally asked as Wade returned to the main room where she waited. "One of Jeb's new crew," Wade answered, running a hand through his hair in frustration, "which means Jeb really is back, and he knows I'm here." "He threatened me," Abigail said quietly. "A man I've never even met." Wade's expression darkened. "That's Jeb's way. He finds what matters to someone and uses it against them." He stopped, seeming to realize what his words implied. Abigail stepped closer to him. "Do I matter to you, Wade?" His eyes met hers, conflicted but unwavering. "More than I should allow," he admitted roughly, "which puts you in danger." "I've lived with danger before," she reminded him, "with fear and threats and people believing the worst of me." "This is different," Wade insisted. "Jeb won't just spread rumors or shun you. He'll hurt you, Abigail. He'll use you to hurt me." "Because he thinks I'm yours," she stated, the words hanging in the air between them. Wade's gaze darkened. "Because I care about you," he corrected softly. "And Jeb knows now. He saw it today, through Cutter's eyes." The admission should have frightened her, but instead, Abigail felt a curious calm settle over her. "Then we face him together," she said, "as we agreed before." Wade shook his head. "I can't ask that of you. This is my fight, my past." "You're not asking. I'm choosing." Abigail closed the distance between them, placing her hand against his cheek. "For the first time in years, I've found somewhere I belong, someone who sees me as I truly am. I won't run from that." Wade's resolve visibly wavered at her touch. His hand came up to cover hers, turning his face slightly to press his lips to her palm in a gesture so tender it made her breath catch. "Abigail," he murmured, her name a prayer on his lips. "If anything happened to you—" "It won't," she promised, though she had no right to make such assurances. "We're both supposed to be cursed, remember? Perhaps together we're stronger than either curse alone." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Is that how curses work?" "I don't know," she admitted. "I only know that I'm not afraid when I'm with you." The declaration hung between them, honest and vulnerable. Wade's eyes darkened as he studied her face, his gaze dropping briefly to her lips before returning to her eyes, asking a silent question. Abigail answered by rising on her toes and pressing her lips to his, tentative at first. Then with growing confidence as his arms encircled her, drawing her against the solid warmth of his body. The kiss deepened, years of loneliness and longing pouring into this single connection that felt like coming home. When they finally parted, both breathing unevenly, Wade rested his forehead against hers. "We should make preparations," he said reluctantly. "Jeb won't wait long." Abigail nodded, though she was reluctant to break the moment. "What do we need to do?" "First, we need to send word to Sheriff Dawson," Wade said. "Whatever our differences, he should know that Jeb Harlow and his gang are in the area." He paused. "Then we prepare the ranch for a potential attack. And I teach you how to shoot, if you're willing to learn." "I'm willing," Abigail answered without hesitation. Wade studied her face, his expression a mixture of pride and concern. "You're not what I expected when I offered you a position that day in the saloon." "No?" Abigail asked, a small smile playing at her lips. "What did you expect?" "Someone broken by what others believed of her," he admitted. "Instead, I found someone who had bent but never broken, someone stronger than anyone gave her credit for." The words warmed her, but she shook her head slightly. "I was broken when I came here, Wade. You helped me find the pieces and put them back together." He kissed her again, briefly but with feeling. "We put each other back together," he corrected, "and now we'll defend what we've built." The next week passed in a flurry of preparations. Wade sent Hector to Redemption with a message for Sheriff Dawson, while he and Abigail worked to fortify the ranch. Wade showed her how to use a rifle and a revolver, patiently guiding her through loading, aiming, and firing until she could hit targets with reasonable accuracy. "You're a natural," he commented after she successfully shot a can off the fence post at 30 paces. "Good eye and steady hands." Abigail lowered the rifle, surprised at how comfortable the weapon felt in her hands now. "I never thought I'd be doing this," she admitted. "My aunt would be scandalized." Wade grinned. "Women out here need to know how to defend themselves. Nothing scandalous about survival." They reinforced doors and windows, moved the horses to the pasture farthest from the house where they would be less likely to be harmed or stolen, and stockpiled supplies in case they needed to withstand a siege. Through it all, Abigail was struck by the strange domesticity that had developed between them, the casual touches, the shared glances, the way they had begun to anticipate each other's needs and movements. Sheriff Dawson arrived on the third day with 2 deputies, his manner considerably more respectful than during his previous visit. He listened grimly as Wade recounted the encounter in Silver Creek. "I've got telegrams out to other jurisdictions," Dawson said when Wade finished. "Jeb Harlow's wanted in 3 territories. If he shows his face, we'll have legal cause to arrest him." "If he shows his face, it'll be with at least 6 men backing him," Wade pointed out. "You willing to ride against those odds, Sheriff?" Dawson's expression tightened. "I uphold the law, Eastwood, even when the odds aren't favorable." "Glad to hear it," Wade replied, "because I expect those odds to present themselves sooner rather than later." The sheriff and his deputies rode back to town after promising to send a patrol by the ranch every couple of days. Wade watched them go with a skeptical expression. "You don't believe he'll help when the time comes," Abigail observed. Wade shrugged. "Dawson's not a coward, but he's a pragmatist. If Jeb comes in force, the sheriff will weigh his duty against the lives of his men. Can't blame him for that calculation." "So we're on our own," Abigail said. "We have Hector," Wade replied with a faint smile, "and each other. It's more than I had the last time Jeb came for me." That night, after Hector had retired to his small cabin near the barn, Wade and Abigail sat together on the porch, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. The air had grown cooler as autumn deepened, and Wade had wrapped a blanket around Abigail's shoulders, his arm remaining to hold her close against his side. "Tell me about your life before," he said softly, "before the rumors started." Abigail was quiet for a moment, sifting through memories that had grown dusty with disuse. "It was ordinary, in the best possible way," she finally answered. "My parents had a small farm near Willowbrook. My father grew wheat and corn, kept a few animals. My mother taught me to read and write, to cook and sew. We weren't wealthy, but we never went hungry." Wade listened attentively, his thumb making small, comforting circles against her shoulder. "And then?" "Then the fever came," Abigail continued, her voice growing softer. "It took half the town, including both my parents. I was 16. My Aunt Clara took me and my mother's sister. She was kind but strict, very concerned with propriety and reputation. A sad smile touched Abigail's lips. She would be horrified to see me now, living unchaperoned with a man, learning to shoot guns. What started the rumors? Wade asked gently. About the curse? Abigail sighed. It was gradual. First, when my parents died, but I survived, some whispered that I'd been spared for sinister reasons. Then the drought came the summer I worked at the Henderson farm. Mrs. Henderson was superstitious, started connecting my arrival with the failing crops. After that, it seemed like whenever something bad happened, people looked in my direction. And no one defended you? My aunt tried at first, but she was older, dependent on the goodwill of neighbors. Eventually, the whispers wore her down too. Abigail leaned her head against Wade's shoulder. The worst was the fire in Willowbrook. I was staying at the hotel while trying to settle my aunt's affairs after she passed. Lightning struck during a storm, and the fire spread to half the town. 3 people died. That's when they stopped whispering and started accusing openly. Wade's arm tightened around her. People fear what they don't understand. Death, drought, fire. They're easier to accept if there's someone to blame. Like you being blamed for trouble following you, Abigail noted. Wade nodded. Difference is, some of that trouble really was my fault. I chose to be a bounty hunter, chose to partner with Jeb. You couldn't have known what he would become, Abigail said firmly. Maybe not, Wade conceded. But I saw the signs and ignored them too long. There were moments when Jeb crossed lines, enjoyed the violence too much, took liberties with captives. I told myself it was just the strain of the work, that he'd settle once we'd made enough money. Abigail turned to look at him, studying the regret etched in his features. We all make choices we wish we could undo. The measure of a person is what they do after those mistakes. Wade met her gaze, his eyes reflecting the starlight. By that measure, you're the finest person I know, Abigail Keller. The words settled around her like a benediction, healing places inside her that had been raw for too long. As are you, Wade Eastwood. He leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished. Instead, Abigail met him halfway, their lips finding each other in a kiss that spoke of understanding, forgiveness, and something deeper neither was quite ready to name aloud. When they parted, Wade rested his forehead against hers. When this is over, he murmured, when Jeb is gone for good, I want... He paused, seeming to search for the right words. I want to build a life with you, if you'll have me. Abigail's heart soared at the tentative offer. I want that too, she whispered, more than anything. The attack came at dawn 3 days later. Abigail was in the kitchen, stoking the stove for breakfast, when she heard Hector's warning shout from outside. She dropped the poker and ran to the window, her heart pounding as she saw riders approaching from the east, at least 8 men, led by a tall figure on a black horse. Wade appeared beside her, buckling on his gun belt. It's Jeb, he confirmed grimly. Get your rifle and take position upstairs in my room. You'll have a better view of the yard from there. Abigail nodded, her training from the past week kicking in as she retrieved her weapon from where it stood by the door. She paused before heading upstairs, grabbing Wade's arm. Be careful, she said fervently. Remember you have something to live for now. Wade's expression softened for a brief moment. He cupped her face in his hand and kissed her swiftly. So do you. Stay low, shoot only if you have a clear target, and if things go badly, there's a horse saddled in the back corral. You ride hard for redemption, and don't look back. Abigail wanted to argue, to insist she wouldn't leave him, but there wasn't time. She nodded once and hurried upstairs to take her position at Wade's window, which provided a clear view of the approaching riders. From her vantage point, she could see Wade and Hector taking defensive positions, Wade behind a large water trough near the front of the house, Hector at the corner of the barn with a shotgun. The riders slowed as they approached, spreading out in a loose semicircle before the house. The leader urged his horse a few paces forward. Even from a distance, Abigail could see the resemblance to the man Cutter had described, tall and lean, with an air of casual menace in his posture. A jagged scar ran down the right side of his face, pulling his mouth into a permanent half-sneer. "Wade," he called, his voice carrying clearly in the morning air. "Come out and greet an old friend." Wade stepped from behind his cover, his stance relaxed but his hand resting near his holstered gun. "You're no friend of mine, Jeb. Not anymore." Jeb Harlow's laugh was harsh. "Still the righteous one, I see. How's that working out for you? Building your little kingdom out here all alone?" "Better than robbing and killing," Wade replied evenly. "What do you want, Jeb? We both know you didn't come for a social call." "Maybe I did," Jeb countered. "Heard you've got yourself a woman now. Cutter says she's a pretty little thing, though apparently cursed." His gaze swept the house, and Abigail instinctively drew back from the window. "Seems fitting. A cursed man and a cursed woman. Regular match made in hell." Wade's expression remained impassive. "State your business and be on your way." Jeb's amusement vanished. "My business is simple. You took something from me in New Mexico, left me for dead. I've come to return the favor." "You tried to kill an innocent family for money," Wade said, his voice hardening. "I did what was necessary." "Necessary?" Jeb spat on the ground. "We could have been kings in this territory, you and me. Instead, you grew a conscience and decided to play rancher." He gestured to his men. "I've got new partners now, ones who understand the value of loyalty." "Last chance to ride away, Jeb," Wade warned. "Sheriff Dawson knows you're in the area. There are warrants out for you in 3 territories." Jeb smiled coldly. "Dawson's occupied with a bank robbery and redemption right now. Strange coincidence, that." Abigail's stomach dropped at the implication. The attack on the ranch had been planned carefully, with the sheriff deliberately drawn away. "Now," Jeb continued, "you have 2 choices. Come with us and answer for your betrayal, or we burn this place to the ground with you and your woman inside." "There's a third option," Wade replied calmly. "You and your men ride away while you still can." Jeb laughed again. "Always were stubborn." His expression hardened. "Take him." Everything happened at once. Jeb's men spurred their horses forward as Wade dove for cover, drawing and firing in a single fluid motion. One of the attackers fell from his saddle, but the others scattered, taking positions around the yard. Gunfire erupted from multiple directions. Hector's shotgun boomed from the corner of the barn, dropping another rider. Abigail steadied her rifle against the windowsill, trying to control her racing heart as she sighted down the barrel at a man who had dismounted and was working his way toward Wade's position. She squeezed the trigger, remembering Wade's lessons: exhale, hold steady, apply even pressure. The rifle kicked against her shoulder and the man staggered, clutching his leg before scrambling behind a water trough. The gunfight intensified, bullets splintering wood and shattering windows. Abigail reloaded and fired again, providing covering fire as Wade made a dash from the water trough to the more substantial cover of a stone well housing. Through the chaos, she lost sight of Jeb Harlow. Scanning the yard frantically, she realized with a spike of terror that he was no longer among the men exchanging fire with Wade and Hector. A sound from below made her blood freeze the back door opening. Abigail abandoned her position at the window, grabbing her rifle and moving quickly to the hallway. She could hear footsteps on the stairs, slow and deliberate. Taking a deep breath, She positioned herself at the top of the staircase, rifle aimed at the landing. Jeb Harlow appeared, gun in hand, that same cold smile playing across his scarred face. He stopped when he saw her, seeming more amused than concerned by the rifle pointed at his chest. "Well, well," he drawled, "the cursed woman herself, prettier than Cutter described." "Stay where you are," Abigail commanded, proud that her voice remained steady despite her fear. Jeb took another step up. "I'm curious, what exactly is your curse supposed to be? Death and destruction follow you?" He chuckled. "Sounds familiar. Wade and I left plenty of both in our wake during our hunting days." "Wade isn't that man anymore," Abigail replied, her finger hovering near the trigger. "No, he's not," Jeb agreed, his tone hardening. "He's become weak, soft." His eyes narrowed. "Because of women like you." "Don't come any closer," Abigail warned as he took another step. Jeb's smile widened. "You won't shoot me. I can see it in your eyes. You've never killed a man before." "There's a first time for everything," Abigail countered, but the slight tremor in her hands betrayed her uncertainty. Jeb seemed to sense her hesitation. He moved suddenly, lunging up the remaining stairs. Abigail fired, but her shot went wide, splintering the banister beside Jeb's shoulder. Before she could chamber another round, he was upon her, knocking the rifle from her grasp and seizing her arm in a painful grip. "Now then," he said, pressing his pistol to her temple, "let's go have a chat with Wade, shall we?" He dragged her down the stairs and toward the front door, using her as a shield. Outside, the gunfire continued, though it had become more sporadic as both sides conserved ammunition. "Wade!" Jeb shouted, pushing Abigail onto the porch ahead of him. "I've got something of yours." The shooting stopped abruptly. From his position behind the well housing, Wade looked up, his expression changing from determination to cold fury when he saw Abigail with Jeb's gun at her head. "Let her go, Jeb," Wade called, his voice dangerously controlled. "This is between you and me." "It was," Jeb agreed, "until you found something to care about more than your own skin." He tightened his grip on Abigail's arm, making her wince. "Put down your gun and come out, or I put a bullet in her pretty head." Time seemed to stretch as Wade and Jeb stared at each other across the yard, the moment balanced on a knife's edge. Abigail could see the calculation in Wade's eyes, the desperate search for options. "Don't do it," she called to him. "He'll kill us both anyway." Jeb yanked her arm roughly. "Shut up." "She's right," Wade said, slowly rising from his cover, gun still in hand. "You've never been one to leave witnesses, Jeb." Jeb's smile was cold. "Maybe I've changed." "No," Wade replied, taking a careful step forward. "That's the difference between us. I changed. You just got worse." Abigail felt Jeb tense behind her, his attention focused entirely on Wade. In that moment, she remembered something her father had taught her long ago, that sometimes the only way to break a predator's hold was to do the unexpected. She went completely limp, dropping her full weight suddenly. Caught by surprise, Jeb's grip loosened momentarily, and his gun wavered away from her head. It was all the opening Wade needed. His revolver barked once, the bullet striking Jeb in the shoulder of his gun arm. Jeb howled in pain, his weapon clattering to the porch boards. Abigail scrambled away as Wade rushed forward, covering the distance between them with astonishing speed. He tackled Jeb off the porch, both men hitting the ground hard. What followed was brutal and swift. The two former partners grappled in the dirt, years of mutual hatred fueling each blow. Despite his wounded shoulder, Jeb fought with the desperation of a cornered animal, landing punches that made Wade stagger. But Wade had righteousness and love on his side, a determination that gave him an edge Jeb couldn't match. A final, devastating punch left Jeb sprawled in the dust, blood streaming from his nose and mouth. Wade stood over him, chest heaving, his own face bloodied, but his eyes clear. "It's over, Jeb," he said, retrieving his fallen revolver and pointing it at his former partner. "Your men are dead or fled." It was true. During the confrontation between Wade and Jeb, Hector had continued picking off the remaining gang members. Those who weren't wounded or dead had indeed fled, abandoning their leader to his fate. Jeb glared up at Wade, hatred burning in his eyes. "You should have killed me in New Mexico," he spat. "Finish it now, if you got the stomach for it." Wade's finger tightened on the trigger. For a moment, Abigail thought he might actually do it, put a bullet in Jeb's head and end the threat forever. She wouldn't have blamed him. But then Wade lowered his gun slightly. "No," he said quietly. "I'm not that man anymore." He glanced at Abigail, who had come to stand beside him. "I've found something better than vengeance." The sound of approaching horses drew their attention. Sheriff Dawson and a dozen armed men were riding hard toward the ranch, rifles at the ready. Wade nodded to Hector, who moved to secure Jeb with a length of rope. "Looks like your diversion at the bank didn't work as planned," Wade told Jeb as the older man bound his hands. "Sheriff's going to be mighty interested in discussing that with you, along with your other outstanding warrants." Jeb's only response was a venomous glare. The cleanup took hours. Sheriff Dawson and his men rounded up the few remaining gang members who had been wounded but not killed in the gunfight. The dead were laid out for identification, then loaded onto wagons for burial in the town cemetery. Jeb Harlow, his shoulder roughly bandaged, was chained in the back of the sheriff's wagon, his future a cell and eventually a hangman's noose. "You did the right thing," Dawson told Wade as they stood watching the preparations to depart. "Killing him would have been justifiable, but letting the law take its course that shows you're not the man he claims you are." Wade nodded, his arm around Abigail's shoulders. "Maybe I finally laid my own curse to rest today." Dawson's gaze shifted to Abigail. "Seems I owe you an apology, Miss Keller. Heard from my deputy how you helped defend the ranch. That's not the action of someone who brings misfortune to others." "Thank you, Sheriff," Abigail replied, surprised by the unexpected acknowledgement. As the sheriff and his men prepared to leave with their prisoners, Wade pulled Abigail aside, leading her to a quiet spot near the garden they had tended together. "Are you all right?" he asked, his eyes searching her face with concern. "He didn't hurt you?" "I'm fine," she assured him, though her arm ached where Jeb had gripped it. "Just a few bruises, nothing that won't heal." Wade's expression softened. "You were incredible today, quick thinking and brave." "I was terrified," Abigail admitted, "but I couldn't let him use me to hurt you." Wade took her hands in his thumbs gently caressing her knuckles. "When I saw him holding that gun to your head, I realized something," he said quietly. "All these years I've been afraid of letting anyone close because I thought my past would endanger them. But today, having you to fight for, to come home to it, didn't make me weaker. It made me stronger." Tears pricked at Abigail's eyes. "I realized something too," she whispered. "All this time I've feared my supposed curse would bring harm to anyone who cared for me. But today, when I thought I might lose you, I understood that the real curse would be never loving at all." Wade's smile was tender, as he reached up to brush a strand of hair from her face. Then perhaps we've both broken our curses today. Together, Abigail agreed softly. Wade's expression grew serious. I meant what I said before about building a life with you. I know it's sudden and maybe improper to ask after everything that's happened today, but he hesitated, then dropped to one knee before her, still holding her hands in his. Abigail Keller, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Joy bubbled up inside Abigail, bright and effervescent. Yes, she answered without hesitation. Yes, I will. Wade rose and pulled her into his arms, his kiss a promise and a beginning all at once. When they parted, both breathless and smiling, he rested his forehead against hers. They said you were cursed, he murmured, a teasing light in his eyes. And I said, so am I. Guess we'll match. Abigail laughed softly. The most fortunate matching I could have imagined. 6 months later, the Eastwood ranch was transformed. Colorful bunting hung from the porch railings, tables laden with food stretched across the yard, and dozens of guests mingled in their Sunday best. The occasion, the wedding of Wade Eastwood and Abigail Keller. The ceremony itself had been simple and heartfelt, conducted by the minister from Silver Creek beneath an arch of wildflowers at the edge of the garden. Abigail wore a dress of ivory silk ordered specially from San Francisco, her auburn hair crowned with a circlet of desert blooms. Wade, unrecognizable from the grim bounty hunter of years past, stood tall and proud in a new suit, his eyes never leaving his bride's face as they spoke their vows. Among the guests were faces that would have been unimaginable 6 months earlier. Sheriff Dawson and his wife, townspeople from both Redemption and Silver Creek, ranchers and merchants who had once shunned Abigail or regarded Wade with suspicion. The defeat of Jeb Harlow and his gang had transformed the couple from outsiders to heroes in the eyes of the community. Most surprising of all was the presence of 3 families from Willowbrook, including the mayor and his wife. They had arrived the day before, somewhat hesitant, but bearing wedding gifts and apologies for their past treatment of Abigail. We were wrong about you, the mayor had said gruffly. Let fear and superstition guide us instead of Christian charity. Hope you can find it in your heart to forgive. Abigail, secure in her newfound happiness, had forgiven freely. The past couldn't be undone, but it need not poison the future. As the celebration continued into the evening, lanterns were lit around the yard, casting a warm glow over the festivities. A small band played, and couples began to dance on a wooden platform Wade and Hector had constructed for the occasion. Wade led Abigail onto the floor for their first dance as husband and wife, holding her close as they moved to the music. Happy, Mrs. Eastwood, he murmured against her ear. Blissfully, she replied, her heart so full it felt it might burst. And you, Mr. Eastwood? More than I believed possible, he answered honestly. You know, a year ago, if someone had told me I'd be dancing at my own wedding with the most beautiful woman in the territory as my bride, I'd have called them crazy. And if someone had told me I'd find a home where I was respected and loved instead of feared, I wouldn't have believed them either, Abigail said. It seems we were both wrong about our curses. Wade's arm tightened around her waist. Not entirely wrong, he said thoughtfully. My past did come back to threaten what I held dear, and trouble did find us, as it found you before. But we faced it together, Abigail pointed out, and we prevailed. Together, Wade agreed, spinning her gently before drawing her back into his embrace. That's the difference. The curses were real, in their way, but they never accounted for what happens when two cursed souls find each other. As the music swelled around them, Abigail laid her head against Wade's chest, feeling the strong, steady beat of his heart. "What has happened?" she asked softly. Wade kissed the top of her head, his voice warm with certainty when he answered. "They heal each other, and in doing so, they build something stronger than any curse could ever be." Around them, the celebration continued, friends and neighbors eating, drinking, and dancing beneath stars that seemed to shine with particular brightness. The night air was sweet with the scent of desert flowers and promise, a fitting beginning to their life together. And if anyone in the years that followed ever whispered about curses when misfortune occasionally found its way to Eastwood Ranch, as it sometimes did, for that is the nature of life, Wade and Abigail merely smiled at each other across their dinner table, surrounded by the children that eventually blessed their union, secure in the knowledge that what others called a curse, they had transformed into their greatest blessing. For in finding each other, two souls the world had branded as harbingers of misfortune, they had discovered a truth more powerful than superstition, that love, freely given and bravely accepted, is the strongest magic of all.